So I would be coming back to retina. We are coming back to retina, and I would be speaking on the most hot topic, that is diabetic retinopathy. Why are we worried? Basically because diabetes is now an epidemic, and it is an epidemic of 21st century. And why are we seeing suddenly an increased incidence? Because of an aging population leading to increased life expectancy, rural to urban migration leading to dietary and lifestyle changes. And it's a major medical problem in not only in developed country but also our developing countries. This almost 400 millions diabetics are on the face of the earth, and here is India. Almost in 2015, 1 out of every 11 Indian is a diabetic now, or across the world, global population. Gender wise, males show a preponderance between 35 to 50 years of the age, otherwise they maintain. But the important thing is one needs to understand that 1 in 7 birth is affected by gestational diabetes, and out of that 1 in 2 women develop into into type 2 diabetic. And this is the area where we need to be watchful, and that is why this is for the purpose of postgraduates, that a gestational diabetic female needs to be followed up in future, also to be on a lookout for her conversion into type 2 diabetic. Common myth is that it is a disease of Raj Yog or a people of rich, but if you look at the statistics across our country, it is no more a disease of elite, neither of an urban. In fact, urbans you see more common is in a low socio-economic group, while in rural population it is more so seen in a high socio-economic group. The reverse pattern which we see across. So now coming directly to diabetes and eye, this is the prevalence. These are the various studies which have been done, and on average we see that 20% of the diabetic population in our country have some form of diabetic retinopathy at any given point of time. Looking at the prevalence part of it, diabetic age less than 5 years, it is 17%, more than 15 years, it is almost 100%, and overall prevalence at any given point of time is 18%, as I've already told. We are all aware what is diabetic age. It is the duration that has lapsed from the date of detection till date. So if more the diabetic age, more the chances of having a diabetic macular edema. So also more the chance, more the progression of a diabetic retinopathy, so also increases the incidence of diabetic macular edema. So what are the factors which affect the development of diabetic retinopathy or diabetic macular edema? This is the list which is enumerated over here. We'll run one by one. The most important thing which happens is a hyperglycemia. Now let us understand how we can control the hyperglycemia. If we control glycemia adequately, good glycemic control, we can in fact reverse the early retinopathy. If you do a tight glycemic control, the reversal of the retinopathy can be reversed in an initial stage. But remember, if you do subject a patient to intensive glycemic control, it leads to worsening of diabetic retinopathy. And so when a patient is brought to you and he is having a diabetic retinopathy, don't put him on directly on insulin, let him stabilize and then adequately stabilized over a period of time, and then take him for proper ophthalmic procedures. Other thing as a postgraduate which you need to remember is what is metabolic memory or a legacy effect. Are you aware what it is? It is, this study gave us this terminology, what is called metabolic memory or a legacy effect. What it showed, what DCCT trial showed, that early intensive treatment with insulin in type 2 diabetics prevented or delayed the development of microangiopathy. So there is something called a memory. So once you are detected diabetic, and in initial few years, if the diabetes is adequately rigidly controlled, you are less likely to have retinopathy or less chances of having more severe version. And so as a postgraduate, you need to remember what exactly metabolic memory and where this terminology we have arrived from. Now regarding the use of insulin versus oral anti-glycemic drug, does any of this affect the management of development of retinopathy? It has been shown that whether you use insulin or oral anti-glycemic drugs, it does not affect the development of retinopathy or diabetic macular edema. So, but adequate control by either of the thing, whatever suits the patient, is enough to retard the development of retinopathy. But yes, one group of drugs, anti-diabetic drugs, that is glitazones, you have to be careful with. 5 to 15% of the patients with diabetic macular edema have a worsening of diabetic macular edema. And why it happens? Basically because glitazones lead to fluid retention. So if you have a case of a diabetic macular edema, he is supposed to, you have to request your diabetologist to shift him away from glitazones. And once you bring down the, shift him to other group of anti-diabetic oral treatment, then later you can treat. And many a times you will be surprised that the diabetic macular edema has come down spontaneously by just shift of the anti-diabetic medicines. Does blood pressure concomitant hypertension affect the diabetic retinopathy? Yes. Incidence of hypertension is 3 times greater in people with type 2 diabetic, and vascular damage due to hypertensive has an additive effect on the severity of diabetic retinopathy. And what UKPDS study showed us that if you control hypertension in a diabetic patient, it reduces the progression of diabetic retinopathy, and also it reduces the need of laser. And what should be the target BP in this patient? 130/80. Regarding the use of specific anti-hypertensive medicines, ACE inhibitors, this Euclid trial, that is Eurodiabetic control trial for lisinopril in insulin dependent diabetic, what we learned was that if you use ACE inhibitors in a hypertensive patient with a diabetes, it reduced the progression of diabetic retinopathy by 50% and progression of proliferative diabetic retinopathy by 80%. But surprisingly, what we learned more from this study was that it also showed beneficial effect in the progression of retinopathy even in normotensive patients. So what does it mean? A diabetic patient, if you use a antihypertensive, that is ACE inhibitors, though they are not a hypertensive, it can have a effect on the regression of the retinopathy. So also this particular RAS study showed us that even in normotensive patient, it slowed the progression of retinopathy by 65 to 70%, and this was independent of its changes in the hypertension. This again was a trial which showed that. Now coming to dyslipidemia. Yes, dyslipidemia, that is total cholesterol and serum LDL, is associated with presence of hard exudate. CURE study, that is Chennai urban diabetic study, showed also that total cholesterol, HDL and triglyceride is associated with diabetic retinopathy. And if you control dyslipidemia, there is a spontaneous improvement of diabetic macular edema. So should you put this patient with a dyslipidemia on a lipid lowering agent? Yes, these are the trials which suggest that field trial as well as ACCORD trial, which shows the beneficial effect of using antilipidemic drugs for bringing down the diabetic macular edema in a patient with dyslipidemia. But at the same time, you have to remember that this beneficial effect is seen only in patients who have a hypertension which is under control. In patients who have a hypertension which is beyond control, dyslipidemia management alone with a dyslipidemic drug does not help. MACUFEN study, what we studied was that if you use this lipid lowering drug, it decreases the diabetic macular edema independent of its lipid lowering mechanism. So a patient with a normal lipid profile, if you use a lipid lowering drug, that is fenofibrate, you will see the lowering of the diabetic macular edema. Similarly, now coming to anemia and diabetic retinopathy, prevalence of anemia is significantly higher in patients with diabetic retinopathy compared to those without retinopathy, that is 28 versus 19%. And severity of diabetic retinopathy increases with the severity of anemia. So if the hemoglobin is less than 12 gram%, it doubles the risk of development of diabetic retinopathy, and so is the need of correction of anemia in this patient. So also obesity, it has shown that direct association between retinopathy and obesity. Importantly, for a pregnant female, it has been shown that pregnancy promotes the onset and worsening of the diabetic retinopathy, though it might be transient in nature. And this is more so seen if the patient has an increased systolic BP at first visit. Now, kidney involvement, that is renal involvement and diabetic retinopathy. SN DREAM study showed that if you have a microalbuminuria, twofold higher risk of development of diabetic retinopathy. But if you have macroalbuminuria, the sixfold higher risk of diabetic retinopathy. And so in this patient, if you give erythropoietin wherever the erythropoietin is down, subcutaneous EPO has shown improvement in best corrected vision as well as severity of diabetic maculopathy. And In a renal failure patient, if you do a renal transplant, it stabilizes retinopathy in almost 60% of the patient, and many times you see the regression of it. Now, regarding the association of diabetic retinopathy with cardiovascular diseases, diabetic retinopathy in type 2 diabetes 1.7-fold increased risk of having a cardiovascular event, and mortality because of cardiovascular event is almost 2-fold in type 2 versus 4-fold in type 1 diabetics, and therefore is the importance of concomitant treatment of cardiac diseases along with diabetic management. Now, these are the common questions. This is a DAMAT study whether aspirin should be used in a case of a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Can it increase to more chances of bleed? DAMAT study has very clearly established that there is no role of stopping aspirin or any antiplatelet agent in while you are managing a case of diabetic retinopathy, and it is not a contraindication even in a case of a proliferative diabetic retinopathy which is bleeding inside the vitreous, that is vitreous hemorrhage. Yes, does aspirin and dipyridamole help in the management of diabetic retinopathy? It might help in early diabetic retinopathy, but it has no role in management of severe diabetic retinopathy. So, when you are managing a diabetic retinopathy, you not only have to take care of hyperglycemia but also other systemic concomitant diseases, and these are the ideal goals which a diabetic patient should have when we are working on his retina. So, now coming to diabetic retinopathy, we are all aware of these classifications which I would just run through because we have already run through, and this is a classification for diabetic macular edema. ETDRS gave this classification, that is non-clinically significant and clinically significant macular edema based on the location of exudate and edema, mild moderate DME, and this is an angiographic classification which classifies as focal, diffuse and ischemic maculopathy, and now we also have OCT based classifications. So, which investigations which we should be doing? Fundus photography is an essential investigation because various studies have seen that there is 23% more chances of picking up a lesion on photography than clinical fundus evaluation, but here it has to be a classic ETDRS 7 field stereo photographs. Now we have better wide angle fundus cameras which can help you in picking almost aura to aura. Now coming to two essential investigations which you do while you are managing a case of a retinopathy or a macular edema, that is fundus fluorescein angiography and optical coherence tomography. These two investigations are not mutually exclusive, but they are mutually complementary and has to be done before assessing and starting the treatment. So, what does the fundus fluorescein angiography help you is? It not only helps you in picking up a lesions like microaneurysms where you can treat, but it also helps you in differentiating it from a ischemic maculopathy where lasers have no role and you can spell a poorer prognosis. In a hazy media like asteroid, or in differentiating simulating lesions like parafoveal telangiectasia. Now look at this particular lesion. This is a angiographic classification of a focal versus ischemic, and in these cases lasers are contraindicated and they spell bad prognosis. Now look at this case. This is clinically few dot hemorrhages. Patient was having progressive loss of vision and angiography showed such a significant ischemic type of a macula, and that is how it helps you in picking up a lesion even in a silent DME. Again, you look at this particular fundus. On fundus evaluation, there are laser marks. Clinically, the macula appears to be very silent, very quiet, but on an angiogram you could see a gross ischemia, and that is the role of picking up a ischemic macula, or in certain lesions when you see progressive loss of vision which you cannot explain clinically, when you still need to do fundus fluorescein angiography. Or for this case, this is a case of an asteroid where clinically we thought macula was okay, but the patient had progressive loss of vision. So an angiogram we could see a diffuse diabetic macular edema. So in a hazy media because of asteroid, here it comes again the role of a fundus fluorescein angiography, or to differentiate it from a simulating lesions like a parafoveal telangiectasia or CNVM. Now, in proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you can pick new vessels, new vascularization elsewhere, NVD you can see over here, or rarely you can have a patient with a diabetic papillopathy where you can pick up a leak from the disc. Newer investigations like fundus autofluorescence, do they have role? Yes, they have certain roles, but their exact contribution to clinical management is not well understood, and so I would be just running through it. The other important investigation which we need to do is OCT. OCT, why is it important? Because clinician cannot reliably pick up a macular edema which is less than 300 microns, and that is why if you have to pick up a lesion, edema, it helps you in picking up a edema. Not only help you, but when you start treating it, whether it is responding to your treatment or not can be very well assessed quantitatively. And so other thing is, today with the OCT we can classify it into various subtypes of a diabetic macular edema, spongy, CSME, and OCT has now changed the management. In fact, if you look at it, except for spongy and CSME where you need anti-VEGFs, these two have become a clinically, these are surgical indications, while these are anti-VEGF indications. Enhanced depth imaging, where you study the choroid, and various EDI studies have shown that thinning of choroid, and some studies have shown thickening of choroid. Not clinically, we really do not understand clinical implications of it. When do you do perimetry? If there is a disc swelling and you see a ischemic area like this and you get classic patterns, it will tell you that it is a ischemic type of a perimetry. Now coming to treatment, what are the treatment options? The gold standard was laser, but today laser has been limited only to focal type of a maculopathy. The moment it starts involving a macula, edema or the exudate, there is no role of focal lasers. Do we need to do pan-retinal photocoagulation for management of a only diabetic macular edema without proliferative diabetic retinopathy? Yes. There are certain indications where this is a non-resistant type of a diabetic macular edema. When an angio was shown, we could see ischemic dropout areas, and in these cases you can do pan-retinal photocoagulation. These are the lasers which are now available. I will just run through it. Now lasers, how do they work? It creates chorioretinitis, that means destruction of the retinal tissue, and therefore though a gold standard, once a gold standard, it is far from ideal because it causes effects through tissue damage leading to decreased visual field, poor night vision, reduced contrast sensitivity, because besides the set of complications like migration of exudate to the fovea, development of CNVM because of a deep burn, or development of a serous detachment. And therefore the search for better alternative treatment is on, and came the pharmacotherapy in big way. The first drug which was used was NSAID, but it really did not show much promising result. Then came the corticosteroids, and then we started thinking, is diabetic macular edema a inflammatory disease? To some extent, yes, and therefore its role has come, and these are the rationale why steroids can be used in diabetic macular edema, because of its anti-inflammatory, anti-apoptic, anti-edematous, anti-angiogenic role. So came the peribulbar injections, but it stayed for a certain period of time, but phase 2 study of NEI showed that no beneficial effect in decreasing edema by adding a two focal laser, and so now peribulbar steroid injections are no longer used. Intravitreal triamcinolone came later on, and there we started giving 4 milligram intravitreal triamcinolone. Now DRCR has restricted its role to pseudophakic macular edema. So pseudophakic diabetic macular edema is the only indication for use of IVTA in today's era. Then came extended release steroid implant, and then came the anti-VEGFs. Anti-VEGFs, this was the first drug, that is pegaptanib, which was introduced, and this is the new kid on the block, that is brolucizumab. These are still in practice. These are the major drugs which we are using in management of diabetic macular edema. And so when you go through the various studies, these are the various studies which are done regarding the role of anti-VEGF in management of diabetic macular edema. To a small person with an IQ less than 50% me, and a person with an IQ more than 90% of a person like this, even he would get rather puzzled by so many studies. So for your sake, I have just summarized what we learned from various studies. So what we learned from various studies is that anti-VEGFs caused sustained visual gain that are superior to laser. This is the study. Then came vision gain is sustained for longer period of time, almost up to 5 years. These are the studies what we learned. Now requirement for injection reduces every year, but need of injection in year 2 and 3 and then to 5 is almost reduced. Combining lasers does not reduce the burden of injections or give better visual result. These are the things what we learned from this regarding steroids. Steroids decreases the central retinal thickness and increase visual acuity, and so in general, what we learnt was beat anti-VEGF, beat steroids, they have a definitely established role in the management of thing. But now look at intravitreal anti-VEGFs. They have to be given for infinite period of time, say 4 weekly or 6 weekly. And every time you invade the eye, there is a risk of endophthalmitis, RD, and vitreous hemorrhage. And repeat injections for infinite period of time, even to the best of the socio-economic countries with the best of the economics, it does not help out so easily. And therefore, if you look at it, invasive procedure, the risk is 1% after 20 to 40 injections. And so search for even other modalities is on. And so came the vitrectomy in management of diabetic macular edema without proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And how does this is the study which showed that the benefit of vitrectomy for doing for diabetic macular edema. So how does it help? What we do a vitreous surgery, we do vitrectomy, we remove the ILMP, internal limiting membrane, which is the innermost layer of the retina, and this is how it benefits the patient, overall health of the patient. And these are the advantages. Direct effect, it reduces thickness, it increases visual acuity. Indirect effect, general health of the retina increases, that is ISOS line improves, normalization of macular circulation, and improved quality of life. So indications initially was only for tractional retina detachment, and why it is picking up in a big way is because once the edema comes down by 50% within a week, it maintains over a period of time in almost 70% of the patient. And that is why in certain set of patients we are doing it as a routine. And so this is the indications of doing vitrectomy in diabetic macular edema. Tractional diabetes, non-tractional in laser treated DME not responsive, or vitrectomy even. This is a study, vital study which you should know, where vitrectomy is done in a naive diabetic macular edema, and here again you can see a progressive increase in the vision as well as central retinal thickness which improves. Yes, every procedure has its set of complications, but specific for this is dye-related toxicity or sometimes deroofing of a cystic macula, and many a times 30% failure to resolve pathology. Yeah, I'm just last. Prognostic factors, these are the prognostic factors, which cases following vitrectomy will improve if you do vitrectomy for diabetic macular edema. Now coming to vitrectomy for proliferative diabetic retinopathy, these are the indications which we are all aware of it, and these are the additional indications we do in now era of MIVS, which has become more safer and practical procedures. And these are the various studies. DRVS group 1, we showed early vitrectomy definitely beneficial in type 1, and TRD, vitrectomy in TRD with a combined RD, early Rubeosis iridis. And if you use an anti-VEGF to bring down vascularity, what are the advantages? These are the goals of vitrectomies which we do. So I would just conclude that we need to remember prevalence of diabetic retinopathy in our country is 18 to 20%. Fundus fluorescein angiography and OCT are complementary, must investigation in understanding what is happening inside the retina. Control of hyperglycemia is the first foremost treatment in the management of diabetic retinopathy. Equally important is the control of associated systemic diseases. Laser is still a primary modality of treatment, but only for focal type of a diabetic macular edema, which is away from fovea, FAZ. But whenever there is an encroachment of edema into the fovea, anti-VEGFs or steroid is the way to treat it. And minimally invasive vitreous surgery is picking up not only for proliferative diabetic retinopathy, but also can be considered as a management strategy for even diabetic macular edema. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant. I think now we conclude.